This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
Okay, coming to you live once again from good old Banff, Energy Safety Canada 2024. And now I have the privilege of hanging out with Jake. You just really came off the stage. I mean, I know this is like almost like a torture chamber. The immediate moment that I grab you off the stage and go, hey, come, let's sit down and talk a little bit. So how did it go? How are you feeling today?
I'm doing fine. Day's going well so far. The presentation, I think, went fine. When I present, I really try to get into the mode with the audience. I'm not always aware of things, so I always try to engage and trust the audience, which is why I build in questions almost always like at the end, hey, by a show of hands, how many people got something useful they can use out of this? I ask that at almost every presentation workshop that I do. I asked it this time, and I saw virtually every hand go up in the audience. So that's more important to me than how do I feel. It's did they get something out of it? It's not about me, it's about them.
So let's talk about the presentation. It was how to build psychological safety in a high hazardous industries.
Yes.
Why did you choose to talk about this subject? How did you come about this?
Well, there's two elements on the title, the psychological safety or the high hazard industries. Which one do you want to know about?
So let's start off. How did you come up with the idea?
The idea
of just coming up with a presentation because, hey, you said you had to sit there and go, there's a market need. This is what I'm going to go with. How'd you come up with it?
So psychological safety grew to me. Now, I may be offending some of the gurus out there in the field. For a long time, when I taught human performance, or what I call the learning-based approach to errors, I had always included an element of the just culture. In fact, one of the biggest things that I did first starting off with, I'd started the classic tools, three-way communication checklist, all that stuff. The thing that bumped me out of that was the just culture, the idea of stop punishing people for mistakes. David Marks came up with the just culture a while ago. And as I delved more and more into that, I got into psychological safety and went, that's almost just culture on steroids. It got a lot of research behind it, and it's not that I discard just culture, but now I get into psych safety because it's a great theory, but as I read it, I went, it's very popular, I like it, it's got a ton of research, Harvard-backed scientist on it, it's good. The trouble was, how do you do it? How do you do it? And you weren't there for the opening of my presentation. Can I give you the quick opening?
Oh, absolutely. I was going to go with that next, so please.
Well, what I do for this presentation is I ask three questions. Hi, my name is Jake. First question, how many of you know something about psych safety? And some groups that I keynote for, do workshops for, 5% of people know about it. This group, 95% of people knew something about it, which is great. This is what I expected. Second question, how many of you all think your industry or your team, your company could use more of it? And then you get the shrugging shoulders and, yes, we could use, yeah. And then again, 90% of hands go up. So we're on the same board. Third question is the kicker. And I say, if you decided on today that come Monday morning, you're going to meet up with your team, and the first thing you're going to do, fresh cup of coffee, hey team, this is our mission for today. This week, we are going to build psychological safety. If you decided to do that, how many of you all would actually know how to do that? Crickets. 1 or 2 hands out of 300 people went up. And I said, look around, and they did, and everybody looked like they'd swallowed a bug. And that's the problem. Everybody thinks psych safety is great. Nobody knows how to operationalize it, and that's what I try to give them.
So let's talk about the operationalizing of psych safety.
Okay.
Where would the process start? How would you, if you were going to do this from scratch, because this is what you're telling people,
yeah,
how do you start it?
So many people would say that psychological safety is an organizational change. I get that. It's a cultural change. I get that, and I respect that. Different consultants, different advisors work with different groups. Some people work with one-on-one, like a coach works one-on-one, like a therapist one-on-one. Some people work with small teams, like a learning team or what I do, my after-action reviews. Some people present to big audiences, and some people work with whole organizations. I'm not the best at that. I work with small teams, large presentations, and so to me, I always tend to think in terms of what can one person do. If there's one leader, every organizational change starts with one guy or woman saying, we're going to do this. Captain Abrashoff, who wrote the book, It's Your Ship. He was a captain, inherited the worst ship in the Navy. He decided to make it better. Now, did he get help? Absolutely, but it came with him. So I always try to go to give the practical techniques or skills that one person can do and then expand to their team, then to their group, then to their company, then to the industry. But it always starts with one person. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about that approach. So it's a different approach on learning. I mean, you can say it that way because it has to start with one person. Some people go, no, we need a group of people starting off. So you're taking it, one person has to almost bring it in, introduces it, and then goes.
Yeah.
When you started looking at it, that this was the best way to go about it, because I'm making some assumptions here, some very big assumptions.
Yeah, but let's do that.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm making some assumptions. What had you garnered at that particular point that you said this was the correct way of going about it, opposed to going, because there's people that are out there that are marketing the hell out of anything they can get a hold of, and they just think that, I need to market everything under the planet. Why the one person approach?
I don't know who said it. God, I want to say it was Mark Twain. He said, anytime you find yourself on the side of the majority, you might want to stop and rethink what you're doing.
Okay.
I don't like to do what's marketable.
Okay.
I don't do things just because they're just because what's popular. I don't care. In fact, I take the Mark Twain approach. I kind of go, I want to do the opposite. And that helps keep me honest, because what I like to do is what works. Many people will say, here's what's new. I teach after-action reviews. Military's been doing those for 40 years. They're not new. They're not new at all. Mm-hmm. But many people, to my astonishment, have never used them before. I teach them, and they're like, how long have these been around? Yeah, since before you were born, if you're a young one. So it's not about what's new. It's not about what's marketable. Not to me. I don't chase that. I actively try to stay away from that. I try to go what works. And for me, working with organizations, it's so different with different organizations, but if I can connect with a small group, small groups make things happen, but there's always a leader of a small group, or some one person has to get a small group together. That's the person I'm starting with.
Okay, very good.
Does that make any sense?
Oh, no, it makes sense. It makes sense. Now, you did mention something that is kind of amazing earlier. What? You referenced that psychological safety. You brought up the term. You asked how many people knew what it was.
Yeah.
Inside of this group, tons of people raised their hand. Now, I know that it's probably an unfair assessment because we're here, but I almost feel to an extent that the group that is here in Banff under Energy Safety Canada is much different than some of the other groups that you get to go hang out with. And I'm saying from my perspective, what do you think Energy Safety Canada has brought into, I guess, we'll just say into the world here, because they're doing things much differently.
They are. No, I think they've done, and again, you're asking me to comment kind of on the organization, so
right.
I'm making...
It's your opinion, so it's the great part about it. It cannot be wrong because it is your opinion.
It is my opinion, but I'm sorry. I'm a recovering academic, so I don't like to give just opinions. I like to give professional opinions, which are based on fact. But I'm winging it because we're working together here. What I think Energy Safety Canada has done, and from what I've seen, because I was last year. Okay, now I can go from some data. Mm-hmm. This is not their first rodeo in terms of HOP or Safety 2, or what I tend to call the learning-based approach to errors. This is not their intro to it. Many of the groups that I work with, the smaller groups, this is their first intro to it, right? And they've never heard of it before. This group, they've heard of it before. They've had different speakers. I did keynoted. I did the number 2 keynote last year on After Action Reviews. Extremely well received, but even for some people there, it wasn't brand new. I gave them a better way to do it, I think, but they've been doing it for a while. I mean, that's why they're doing it well. They've picked on something that works. They realized it's a journey. It's not you just do this, and next year we're doing something completely different at the conference. This is always going to be a recurring thing. Mm-hmm. Hopefully it will be.
Well, that's what it's looked like so far. It's continuation of, hey, this is what we did last year. This is what we're doing this year. I was already talking to Amy Kruger, who kind of runs the thing. I mean,
yeah.
And you take a listen to her, and I was like, so come Friday, are you getting to rest, decompress? And she already told me, no, come Friday, we're already planning for the next event. So, I mean, she's already running, and she goes, based on what we're hearing this year, this is what we're already thinking. So it continues to evolve.
They're doing a great kind of after-action review, which is talk while the nonverbal memories are still fresh. You can look at the data 3 months from now, but the gut hunches that they're getting this week is super important to debrief and discuss while they're fresh, because the half-life for those things, 24, 48 hours. You wait until next week, and you're going to lose half the ideas. You wait 2 or 3 days after next week, you're going to lose 3/4 of the ideas. So I love what they're doing.
So let's talk real quick. You reference also as well some after-action reviews. And because of my audience, they're going to ask this question, so I have to ask because I get to be the one that sits here.
Right.
To you, what's the difference between an after-action review and a learning team? Is there a difference? Is there something that's
Yes.
Are they comparable to each other? How does it work?
So I'm not an expert on learning teams. It's not, we can only, well, I would say the most ethical and authentic advisors and consultants and speakers teach what they are expert in, what they deeply down in their bones have done for years and years and years. Not, again, what's marketable and they picked up, 10 minutes ago and read one book on. I don't teach or do after learning teams because that's not my heritage. I didn't learn them. I have great respect for the people that have done them. I've talked to Brent Sutton and the folks, and I like basically that model. Like any other model, I think it has pros and cons. I think it's hugely popular right now, and that brings its own problems.
Right.
After-action reviews were designed by the military in the 1970s or early 1980s as a way to debrief really complex multi-team battle simulations before all the computers happened. What they realized was people would go through and one person might get a super great insight, but there's 20 other officers or other people that are like they didn't get that insight. And if you waited and tried to write up some big fancy report, it always got lost. What's better is a short, semi-structured, non-punitive post-job debrief for jobs that go well, not jobs that go south. So it's learning from normal work, as some people say today, and that's what an after-action review is. A semi-structured, non-punitive, post-job debrief for jobs that go well.
So because you're talking about this, is this what Energy Safety Canada has you focusing on in regards to some of the work that you're doing with them outside of the presentation?
I'm not doing, at least not right now, doing work with them outside the presentation. Okay. That might happen in the future.
Did I say something too early? Uh-oh.
Yeah, no. Who knows what's going to come? And, I serve at the pleasure of my clients, and that always changes. So who knows what's going to happen? And that's part of the reason I like being in business for myself is, what I think is going to happen 6 months from now is going to be very different from when it actually happens 6 or 9 or 12 months from now.
So earlier you mentioned that you have a PhD in education.
Yeah.
So how did you get from there to here?
I lost a bet.
Was that for the PhD of education or for getting into this? I'm joking.
I thought for a while that I wanted to be a professor. I love teaching. It's in my blood. I was bitten by the teaching training bug when I first became a volunteer firefighter. And I went through the trainings and I went, I love this stuff. And I think what I really loved about the training and teaching was, how do I put this? It created the good ones, the good trainers and teachers, of which I have had several, created some of the safest spaces I've ever been in. I found that more in training than I did at home without going into too much detail. So some of the best teachers I've had are the people that made me feel the safest. And I went, I want to recreate that and give people skills and see those aha moments. And that's what is, that's my drug. I'm with a group and I see people writing stuff down and going, God, that's it. Or taking a risk where they feel a little bit nervous saying something. I'm going to go, that's a great idea. And they love it. That's what I live for professionally. So I decided I wasn't going to get that as a professor because I went and got the PhD, studied education. That was great. What I actually wound up learning from was doing about 4 years of outdoor experiential ropes courses. We take people up into the trees, out in the field. We get them lost in the woods, orienteering, map, and compass, and then we debrief. We don't have a curriculum we're trying to teach. It's do the experience first and then debrief. And it's creating a safe space very quickly with a group of strangers or something like that. And I did that for about 4 years. I learned more from leading ropes courses, really good national level ropes courses. For 4 years, I learned more from that than the number 10 education school in the U.S. So I learned my trade at grad school, but not in grad school, if that makes any sense.
Does that make sense?
Anyway, I decided, I'm like, this is what I want to make a career out of, but I realized the academic world doesn't want that. They don't really want good teachers. They want people who crank out papers every 4 weeks. As the old joke goes, the politics in the academy are so bad because the stakes are so low. And so I wanted some with a little bit higher stakes. And so I went, well, I used to be a firefighter, paratrooper, EMT. I missed kind of taking those risks. I didn't make any of those a career, but you know what? There's this electric company that does some pretty high hazard stuff, and they need somebody in the safety and training. So I went and worked with them, and that's how it got started.
So how was it safety and training? How did you know that would be the correct door to go through?
A lot of the high hazard stuff that I would say the high reliability teams that I've worked for in the past, served with, Army paratrooper, Army National Guard paratrooper, non-combat, by the way, I always have to say that, it's a different world, EMT, firefighter, a lot of what we did was about safety. Patient safety, taking care of the patient, firefighter safety for us, and I realized a lot, and parachute, a lot of stuff is emergency procedures. You get cross risers. How do you figure that out while you're falling down to the ground? You have a very limited window to figure that out in. A lot of it was what you might call safety procedures. So I never got a safety degree, but I felt very comfortable looking at risk and going, what are practical ways to either minimize that risk or to put fail-safes in place so that when that risk happens, the error is going to happen, but you make it so the error doesn't disable you. So I felt pretty at home in the safety department, looking at incidents and kind of going, why did that happen? And then I shifted into human performance because they had a couple incidents where a technician accidentally turned off a power plant. No safety. Those things are pretty bomb-proof, but they cost $100,000 a day or something to be offline. So it was an error. Wasn't safety related. Might have injured somebody, but errors like that tend to get executives very, very interested very quickly in human error. And so they tasked me with, not so much on the training side, but and not so much on the safety side, but on the human error. That's when I got into human performance. And, I've been wrestling with that and trying to learn and figure things out ever since.
So you use the term HP, you use human performance.
Yeah.
To you, another opinion
Yep.
with the data that you have.
Yeah.
Is HOP different than HP? From your point of view? And human organizational performance, just in case there's anybody out there not sure what the HOP thing stands for, and not hops with the S at the end, just in case.
Yeah, that's the joke. I like to think that the whole world of HOP was thought up by a couple of guys having beers. That's a different story. I try not to get too tied up in the names. Okay. I think HOP has been, I want to say this politely, marketed a lot and promoted a lot. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. And it is when people, you need something short and brief that is, hey, I want to learn more about that. Right? But to me, many people would say human and organizational performance includes the organization, but the old human performance stuff didn't. I think that's incorrect. I think that's a very limited way of looking at stuff. I included organizational stuff with HP, so I go back and forth. It depends. If I'm with people who are like, they're all about HOP, great, we'll call it HOP. Many people that I start with, or they'll call it human performance, I'm not going to go correct them on that. Right. To me, it's the strategies and the tools and the approaches and the principles that I want them to get right. If you call it something different, that's okay. I don't get tied up too much in the names, but there isn't as much of a distinction for me as there is for most people.
No, and I only ask the question because we'll call them purists for the comments here that you say it the incorrect way. Yeah. And they correct you right away. And I was like, hold on, are we really applying the HOP concepts here? But that's a different story.
And I tend to call them HOP fundamentalists. Yeah.
So as you're looking through the industry, because you're saying that you get to hang out, you get to do a lot of different things.
Yep.
What are you seeing that are trends? What are you seeing that we're not catching at the moment that we probably need to start looking those general directions? And you don't need to name a client or anything along those lines, just stuff that you're seeing, because you're getting to travel, you're getting to do different things.
I'm not. I try not to try to predict the future. I mean, you're asking me to do that. And so, as you know, I try to go on what's my experience, what's my data, what do I know. I joke and I tell people to this in my after action review thing. When you start off a conversation by saying, "What do you think about X?" You're going to get into a spiderweb of opinions, which there may not be a good way out of. So instead, ask, "What do you know about this topic?"
unfortunately, I don't have a topic to ask. That's why I go the opinion-based question based on what you've seen.
Yeah.
Not actually, because if you can predict the future, then I'm going to ask you for lottery numbers, because that's going to become a totally different conversation.
Yeah, and there's research out there on experts predicting the future, and they don't do very well. And it's surprising. What do I see in the one?
Well, not seeing the future, but what are you seeing trend-wise? What do we need to be looking at?
One thing that I am seeing, one thing that I do get called in for, I have more than one, several clients basically, without naming names, have called me in saying, we've had other speakers or other presenters and stuff who talked theory, and they might be inspiring, they might be funny, and they might give you a wow, like, wow, I've never thought of that before. And that's valuable. I don't want to get that wrong. That is valuable to have. But then they wound up kind of saying, okay, a month after that presentation, what are we doing differently? And the answer was nothing. That's why they tend to call me. I just give a presentation on psychological safety, and I'm not going to go say what Amy Edmondson said. She's the leader on the theory. But again, I asked my third question. How many people actually know how to build psych safety? Crickets. Nobody said anything. So I gave them, here's 8 different phrases to use, here's 4 different questions to ask, here's how to engage a peer mentor so you can call them to bolster psych safety when you most need it and you're most in danger of losing it. And I showed them how to write an assurance statement, which is something that's beautiful for executives to have, to actually, what actually to say to people. So one of the trends, to answer your question, is great, we got the theory, we got the idea. How do we do this? How do we operationalize this? How do we make it work? What is, as we used to say in the Army, what's the field expedient way to actually make this happen? That's what I love doing. That's one trend that I'm starting to see more and more of is, give us stuff that we can actually use and implement and try. So it's more, and that comes from kind of my training background, like firefighter. Firefighter class, we didn't just talk about firefighter theory. Well, here's how flame works. That's great. How do I attach a spanner, a 33-foot, hose to do suction out of a pond when I only have this much of a draw? Or GPM versus PSI. How do you balance those out with a crossover valve? It was all very, very practical, and it included theory with it, which is really interesting. But it's the skills that came first, backed up by the theory, not just here's theory and we don't have enough time to go into the practical skills. That ticks me off.
And I think that's where a lot of people miss. It's the practical application.
Yeah.
This is what's missing inside of the industry. I see a lot of people going out there, they're saying, hey, we have these courses that are available. I can give you a certification in 3 days because you went through some class, and all of a sudden now you're certified in training whatever. But it's not the physical application, because that certification that I got in 3 days, what does that mean? I think that means is it a participation reward?
Yeah, for a lot of places it is. It's seat time. It's did you pass the test? It might be as bad as a seat time award, which is horrible. If you go a step up from that, it's you have to pass a knowledge-based test. Okay, that's great, but there's a lot of people who can pass a knowledge-based test that can't do anything. A researcher years ago named Chris Argyris studied experts from many different fields, architecture, some sports, things like that, and he measured the top 3% of people with the top 30% of people. And he gave them, what's the difference between the top 3% and the top 30%? And he gave them different tests, and there was no statistical difference on the tests, meaning the top 3% and the top 30% knew the same stuff. The top 3% didn't. Actually had habits like the James Clear book, which I love, Atomic Habits. Great quote that I go by. I wish I had thought of it, but I got to attribute it to James Clear. He said, we do not rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems.
Genius.
Perfect, right? So you can have great goals. You can have great knowledge. What are the habits you've built? What are the systems you've built? Not just for your team or your company that somebody else is going to implement, but it always starts with you. I always suggest for leaders, when they're doing, for an example, an after-action review, I say, don't delegate that to your people. Don't send out a memo saying, I just took this seminar from Jake and I want you all to do this. Don't do that. You do them. You take the risk. You stand and deliver. And then go from there.
So, Jake, let me ask you this real quick. So, you're here. This is your second year in a row out here in Banff.
Yes.
Hanging out, taking a look around. teaching the world how to change. What do you think about this area? I mean, I have to tell you, this is probably about one of the most beautiful places that I've been to in regards to being able to hang out and do some stuff.
I brought my wife up this year because last year I came and I showed up and I said, I'm basically staying at Hogwarts.
That's what it looks like.
And I do. And I took some videos and my kids went, really? Dad? Really? I asked them, they weren't super big on coming, and I went like, okay, that would expense somewhat. But I felt guilty kind of for enjoying this alone. And mostly it was about work. When I'm here, I'm on mission. I'm in service to my clients and doing the presentation. But now that I've done my half-day workshop and event reviews, which went great, and the breakout on after-action reviews, now I get to relax. The best description I've heard of this was up on top of Sulphur Mountain where I went last year, and it was a poster from 1920s, and somebody said, Banff is the Switzerland of North America.
I love it.
I thought that was great, and that's the best way. That's kind of an insult to the Swiss Alps. It's not quite that, but that's the vibe that you get. Yeah.
So what events do you have coming up next that might be open to the public? If you have anything available?
I don't do, for example, open enrollment stuff where it's, here, pay this much and come do that. The logistics of doing that are not very great. I'm not saying I won't do them in the future. I do offer, I usually try to do one webinar free, open to anybody. You got to register per month. It's some busy months like in April I didn't have time to do it, but I'm trying to do that about once a month. That's great to do. Most of the work that I do is bespoke, as they say some places. It's your client groups hire me, and it's an internal client group. It's not open. However, 2 conferences that I've got coming up, which are open to the public, come and see me. One is Co-Learning, the CHOL conference. That's going to be outside of Las Vegas. That's going to be, I believe, in June.
June the 12th. June the 12th.
Thank you for that. And for that, I'm doing actually a half-day workshop on my overview, which is called 7 Practical Steps to Build a Culture of Safety and Human Reliability. That's 7 really good practical steps. And then I'm also doing a plenary, I believe, on event reviews, a very short 1-hour-long thing on my process of event reviews. So come and take that. And then for the ASSP, American Society of Safety Professionals one, I'm doing just a breakout, one of many, on event reviews again. So that's getting pretty popular.
And that one is in San Antonio? I don't know.
No.
That was last year. I have it mixed up.
That was last year.
Okay.
ASSP, I believe, is in August, and it is in Denver, Colorado.
Okay. I should have guessed Colorado because that's kind of where they go, Texas, Colorado, quite frequently. So just wondering. Now, if people want to find out more information about your work, can they go?
ReliableORG.com. My website, ReliableORG.com. I'm actually just getting it redone. It's not done yet. So if you look at it now, it may look dramatically different in about a month. But do that. And also feel free just to email me, jake@reliableorg.com. And I'm on LinkedIn. Just look for my last name, Mazulewicz. Pretty easy to find. There's not a whole lot of us out there by that. And connect with me on LinkedIn.
Well, Jake, I really do appreciate the time.
Thank you.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and its guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the company. Examples of analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based only on very limited and dated open source information. Assumptions made within this analysis are not reflective of the position of the company. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast, Jay Allen.